Previously, Kanbar revealed to Raon a shocking secret. The village chief had obtained a precious jewel and buried it underneath the chief's house, unknown to most people. Raon stood there, lost in thought, worrying that if Eden didn't find the Mana Stone, they would burn down the village. Missed the previous parts? Go back and catch up. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let's dive back into the manhwa. Scene shift. The 5th Training Hall and 6th Training Hall groups comb through the area, searching for any remaining orcs. A member of the 5th Training Hall group spoke up, "We don't see any more orcs around." One of the group member from the 6th Training Hall replied in agreement, "Same here." After completing their mission, the group returned to the village, where they were greeted with warm smiles and open arms. The villagers welcomed them back with joy, relieved that the threat of the orcs had been eliminated. The village leader, beaming with gratitude, shook hands with Ben. "Thank you for doing all this for us," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. The village leader continued, "You're just as skilled as they say the Siegharts are." "Thank you again." Ben smiled humbly, replying, "Of course, I'm glad we were able to help." Raon watched the village head and the group, lost in thought, when suddenly Martha appeared beside him, sitting on a tree branch. "Did things go the way you wanted?" Martha asked, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Although I'm not too sure what it is that you wanted." Raon's eyes widened in surprise as he called out Martha's name. "Martha. I'm not sure either, but I'll tell you when the time comes." Martha jumped down from the tree, her movements agile and swift. "Don't worry, Raon," she said with a determined look. "No matter what happens, I'll follow your orders until the mission is over." With that, Martha walked away, leaving Raon to ponder the weight of her words. Runan's sudden appearance breaks the silence. "Raon, what are you doing here?" Runan asks, curiosity etched on her face. Raon turns to face Runan, a mixture of surprise and caution in his expression. Runan's concern is palpable as he asks, "Are you worried about something? You don't seem like you're in a good mood." Raon's response is calm and collected, a hint of a mask slipping into place. "It's okay, there's no problem. The chief said he's holding a banquet. Let's go." The tension is subtly deflected, but Runan's eyes linger on Raon's face, searching for any hidden truth. As Raon walks alongside Runan, his thoughts drift to the impending situation. "Eden will not step in until we leave," he thinks to himself. "What happens tomorrow is going to be important." A sense of foreboding settles in, and Raon's expression remains calm, but his mind is racing with anticipation and concern. The next day, the group walked along the outskirts of Cebu village, chatting and laughing together. Their conversation was filled with a sense of pride and accomplishment. "That was perfect," one of them exclaimed. "We took down all of the monsters in Cebu Mountain, and we ended up with very few injured." Another member nodded in agreement. "It was our first mission, but we were able to clear it perfectly." As Ben glanced at Raon, he thought to himself, "I assume that's why Raon isn't asking to take the lead again. There was no flaw in my leadership. I'm not sure why he gave me the authority, but I hope he'll realize that my leadership skills are comparable to him." With a sense of confidence and determination, Ben spoke up to the group, "Let's hurry out of here." His voice was firm and decisive, urging the group to move forward. As the group continued to move forward, Raon stood frozen, his eyes fixed on them. Suddenly, he shouted loudly, "Everyone, stop!" The group halted abruptly, turning to face Raon with a mix of confusion and concern. Some of the group members whispered among themselves, "What is it? Can't we keep going? It's too early to camp." Their voices were laced with confusion and a hint of frustration, unsure of why Raon had suddenly called for them to stop. They exchanged curious glances, waiting for Raon to explain himself. Raon's words hung in the air, "This is where our real mission begins." Kane's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean, Raon?" Raon's expression remained enigmatic. "Just like I said, the mission is not yet over." Ben's face darkened, his voice rising in protest. "What are you talking about?" The group's confusion and unease grew, sensing that something was amiss. Ben's question hung in the air. "We killed the orcs and even cleaned up after them, so what are you talking about?" Raon's expression remained calm, his voice measured. "Our mission was to take down the monsters and to protect the village." Ben's curiosity got the better of him. "So what's the problem?" Raon's eyes scanned the surrounding area, his voice low and serious. "There was someone watching us until just a moment ago." Ben's eyes widened in surprise, his voice bursting out in alarm. "What?" The group's heads snapped towards Raon, shock and concern etched on their faces. Raon's expression turned grave, his voice laced with concern. They were watching us until an hour ago and then disappeared. You could say that it might have been an instructor, but I felt hostility. Too hostile to think that it could have been an instructor. The group exchanged uneasy glances, the atmosphere growing thick with tension. Raon's eyes seemed to gaze into the distance, his voice low and serious. I felt those eyes even before we arrived at the village, and I sensed them disappearing toward the village when we had gone far enough from the village. Ben's face went pale, his eyes wide with shock. Are you serious? His voice trailed off, the implications sinking in. Martha's brow furrowed in concern. Wait, from before we arrived? Raon's gaze remained steady, his voice precise. To be precise, it was when we arrived at the hill by the village. The group's eyes were fixed on Raon, awaiting his explanation. Martha's voice was laced with curiosity. Then the reason you gave Ben the authority was? Raon's expression remained calm, his voice measured. Yes, I hid my presence in order to get a better sense of the enemy. Kane's eyes remained fixed on Raon, but his mind began to wander, reflecting on the events that had transpired. He thought to himself, I felt this during the bet too. But his tactical sense, as well as his other senses, are better than an ordinary instructor. Even I couldn't tell that there was someone watching us. A mixture of surprise and admiration swirled within Kane. Ben's eyes searched Raon's face, seeking clarification. That's the reason you gave me the leader role? Raon's expression softened, his voice filled with a hint of warmth. Yes, I thought that if you were the leader, you could take good care of the trainees. Raon continued. You did great too. I'm sure the enemy thought that you were the top trainee thanks to that, and they didn't notice me at all. Raon's words of praise warmed Ben's heart as he placed a hand on his shoulder. You are a true Sieghart, Raon said with a smile. I'll recommend you as the second top trainee once we return. Ben's thoughts were tinged with a mix of surprise, humility, and a hint of embarrassment. I thought I had put myself on equal grounds with Raon, he reflected, but it seems I was far off. He wasn't even trying to compete with me. He was just trying to gather more information about the enemy, something that had gone unnoticed by everyone else. A wry smile formed in his mind as he continued, and I didn't even know that. I was overjoyed, thinking I was equal to him. Raon's eyes scanned the group, his expression serious. As I said earlier, monsters are creatures that cannot cooperate with other species. But in this mission, we witnessed orcs and goblins working together in harmony. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. This can only mean one thing: the enemies are using some means to control the monsters. Raon's expression turned grave, his eyes burning with determination. Our first mission was to protect the village, and it's not over yet. A threat still looms over the village, waiting to strike. We can't consider our mission a success until that threat is eliminated. Raon's voice dropped to a whisper as he outlined their plan. We're returning to Cebu, but we'll need to be stealthy to avoid detection. Ideally, it'd be nice if we had equipment suited for it, but since we don't, turning to the green-haired boy, who seemed taken aback. The green-haired boy rummaged through his bag, producing an assortment of stealth gear. He held it up, a hopeful smile on his face. Would this suffice for stealth equipment? Raon's eyes widened in astonishment as he took in the array of gadgets. When did you get all this? He asked, his voice tinged with surprise. The green boy's smile grew wider, his eyes sparkling with mischief. I brought it just in case. Raon's eyes grew even wider in surprise as he stared at the green-haired boy. You carry around 40 of these, just in case? He asked, his voice laced with incredulity. The green-haired boy nodded nonchalantly, a cheerful grin still plastered on his face. It's good to always be prepared. Raon couldn't help but, impressed by the boy's foresight. Good job. Raon addressed the group, a determined glint in his eye. All right, let's move out. We'll conduct this mission with the stealth training we've received. He turned to Crane, his voice firm. Crane, I need you to inform the nearest Sieghart branch of the situation. You're the fastest among us, so I'm counting on you to get the message through quickly. Crane's eyes widened in surprise, and he hesitated for a moment before responding, all right? As Crane departed to complete his task, Raon's expression turned stern, his voice taking on a commanding tone. Everyone, listen up. From now on, obey my orders without question, no matter what. I will not tolerate any disobedience. The scene shifted to Eden's temporary shelter, nestled near the Cebu mountain. 5 hours had passed since the group's departure. One of Eden's followers, kneeling on the ground, spoke up in a hushed tone. They've finally all left. We checked the other side, just in case, but there was no problem. Eden's eyes gleamed with a calculating intensity as he replied, his voice low and even. Then we'll begin the plan. Then began to transform into his orc form, his body contorting and growing as he let out a fierce roar. Restoration, he bellowed, his voice echoing through the air. With a burst of rage, he slammed his leg into the ground with brute force, causing the earth to crumble and a massive hole to open up. And Eden climbed to the top of a nearby mountain, his sword at the ready. He gazed out at his followers, his eyes blazing with intensity. Kill them, he commanded, his voice carrying on the wind. Don't spare even one. The orc followers began to charge towards the village, their roars and battle cries filling the air. Raon's group watched from their vantage point on the hills, their eyes fixed on the scene unfolding below. Ben turned to Raon, his voice low and urgent. There really were orcs left. Ben's face twisted in anger as he spoke up, his voice trembling with rage. We'll put an end to them for real this time. But Raon's calm and collected voice cut through Ben's fury, his words dripping with caution. No, not yet. I thought I told you that there are eyes on us. Ben's expression froze, his mouth still open in a snarl. He stared at Raon in stunned silence. Raon's eyes narrowed, his gaze scanning the surroundings as he continued, it's not some monster watching us either. It's a human. We don't know the identity of the enemy yet. Ben's face contorted in frustration, his voice rising in urgency. But look how many of the orcs there are. The villagers won't be able to stop all those orcs. Raon's voice remained calm and measured, but his words carried a sense of caution. But if we just intervene now and lose, we'll all die too. Ben's expression turned desperate, his voice laced with urgency. We better intervene now if we want to save the village. Raon's eyes locked onto Ben's, his gaze steady. Don't you remember the instructor telling us that it's important to really understand the mission? The timing is not right yet, and we need to be even more careful since the enemies are from Eden. The group's eyes widened in surprise, and Kane's voice rose in shock. Wait, Eden. Martha's voice trembled slightly as she spoke up. You mean the Eden of the 5 demons? Ben's face went pale, and he was rendered speechless, his eyes wide with alarm. Raon's expression remained serious, his voice measured. If they're able to control the monsters, it could only be either Eden or a Lord-rank monster. So, we need to be careful. Ben's voice barely above a whisper, his tone trembling with a mix of fear and reverence. I'm aware of how strong Eden is, and that you're right. Ben's trembling tone gave way to a surge of emotion, his voice rising in anguish and accusation. But if we don't move now, half the village will die. Are we supposed to just hide here and wait while they're dying? I thought that you were someone fitting of the name Sieghart. But this isn't right. We should fight right now. Ben's voice rang out with conviction, his words a passionate declaration. That's what a Sieghart swordsman should do. With a fierce determination burning in his eyes, Ben leapt forward, standing at the edge of the cliff. His voice echoed out, a challenge to the others. I don't care whether any of you follow me or not. If any of you believe yourselves to be a true Sieghart swordsman, then follow me. Raon's voice was laced with frustration, his words tinged with exasperation. That guy. But before Raon could say more, Runan's voice cut in, her tone resolute. I'm going too. With that, Runan followed Ben's lead, jumping off the cliff. Some of the trainees from the 5th training hall spoke up, their voices filled with conviction. Sir Ben is right. As a Sieghart, it'd be embarrassing to be frightened just because the opponent is one of the 5 demons. Another trainee nodded in agreement, their voice ringing out. That's right. We're recruits affiliated with the 6 emperors. The trainees of the 5th training hall began to stir, their faces set with determination. With a collective burst of energy, they started to run, following in Ben and Runan's footsteps. As they rushed past Raon, they called out to him, their voices filled with urgency. We're going too. We have to hurry and protect the village and its people. Kane's voice cut through the air, his eyes blazing with determination as he turned to his group from the 6th training hall. Is it straight ahead? We'll help the 5th training hall and attack the ghosts of Eden. The group responded in unison, their voices firm and resolute. Yes, sir. Raon stood still, watching as his group members rushed off to join the battle. A thoughtful expression crossed his face as he gazed after them. Everything was unfolding just as he had predicted. Given the personalities of Ben and the recruits, he had known they wouldn't be able to stand idly by in the face of injustice. Their strong sense of justice would compel them to rush forth and stop Eden and the monsters. Raon's thoughts continued, a hint of strategic calculation in his mind. That's why I sent Runan and Aura a message to follow after them beforehand. With Ben, Runan, and even Kane heading there, not even Eden will be capable of holding out. If there's anything unexpected, his thoughts trailed off, his eyes narrowing slightly as he considered the possibilities. Raon turned to Martha, a hint of curiosity in his voice. "Martha, why didn't you go? I thought you'd be the first one to run off." Martha's eyes widened in surprise, her expression caught off guard by Raon's question. Martha's expression turned serious, her voice firm. "I told you, I'm following your orders down to the wire." Raon's gaze met Martha's, a slow smile spreading across his face as he regarded her. Raon's smile faded, replaced by a serious expression. "All right. In that case, we'll be heading towards the village like they are. But conceal your presence as much as possible as you move. There's no doubt Eden has reinforcements hidden away from the front lines." Raon's eyes narrowed, his mind racing with strategic thoughts. He could sense a strong killing intent emanating from the mountains, separate from the village. A hint of concern crossed his face as he thought about the 5th and 6th training halls engaging the enemy. The 5th and 6th training halls can take care of the rest of the enemies, he thought, but it'd be dangerous if they fight that guy head-on. A sly glint appeared in his eye as he considered an alternative approach. But that's only if you fight head-on, assassination is a different story. The scene shifted to Ben and his group, who were in the midst of a fierce battle against a horde of orcs. Ben's voice rang out, his words of guidance and encouragement cutting through the chaos. "Don't take the orcs' attacks directly, step back and then counterattack," he shouted. "If it's difficult for you to fight them alone, form teams. Remember, if we don't stop them here, the village will be in danger." As Ben clashed with the orcs, his thoughts flashed back to the previous day's battle. He noted a significant difference in the orcs' behavior, his eyes narrowing in concern. "These orcs are far more ferocious than the ones I fought yesterday," he thought to himself, his mind racing with the implications. A hint of confidence crept into his thoughts as he continued to fight. If it's just this, then protecting the village wouldn't be a problem. Ben's thoughts took a darker turn as he considered the true nature of their enemy. His expression turned grim, his eyes clouding with concern. "The problem is that as long as our enemy is Eden, then there's no way they'd stop at this," he thought, a sense of foreboding settling in. His mind flashed back to Raon's words, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for the other's insight. Raon was right, all along. Ben's voice rang out, his warning echoing through the forest. "All forces, watch out for threats coming from above and camouflaged within the forest." One of the group members' eyes widened in alarm as they looked around, their voice trembling with concern. "Huh? No way!" Ben's eyes locked onto the camouflaged figures, his mind racing with recognition. "It's Eden's Green Phantom Corps," he thought to himself, his grip on his weapon tightening. He took in the details of their attire, the goblin masks and distinctive headgear, leaving no doubt as to their identity. A hint of surprise crossed his face, his eyes narrowing in concern. "I expected them to come," he thought, "but I didn't think there'd be so many." Ben's gaze swept across the forest, his eyes quickly tallying up the number of Green Phantom Corps members. His expression turned grave, his mind racing with the implications. "A cursory glance tells me there's easily more than 40 of them," he thought, his grip on his weapon tightening. "We've got to play our cards right if we want to fight this many foes." Ben's voice rang out, his words clear and decisive as he issued orders to his comrades. "Kane, you hold back the orcs with the others, make sure they don't reach the village. Runan, use your cold air to freeze the orcs and Green Phantom's feet, immobilize them." He paused, his eyes scanning the battlefield before meeting the gazes of his teammates. "I'll take charge." Runan's voice was firm and resolute as she acknowledged Ben's order. "Understood. I'll freeze them all." With a swift motion, she raised her sword, and a brilliant, frost-icy aura burst forth from her sword. The air around her seemed to shimmer and chill, as if winter itself was being unleashed. Suddenly, towering ice pillars erupted from the ground, their crystalline structures glinting in the fading light. The pillars encased the orcs and Green Phantoms, freezing them in place, their feet and legs trapped in the unforgiving ice. With a fierce battle cry, Ben unleashed his continuous flow sword technique, his blade slicing through the air with deadly precision. He pushed off the ground with his leg, using the momentum to propel himself forward. As he charged, the autumn wind sword technique kicked in, imbuing his blade with the fierce energy of the autumn gusts. The sword sliced through the crowd of orcs, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Ben's movements were a blur, his sword dancing through the air with a rhythmic whoosh, cutting down any orc that dared to stand in his way. His technique was a perfect blend of speed, power, and agility, making him a formidable force on the battlefield. As Ben stood victorious, his chest heaving with exhaustion, a sudden movement caught his attention. A green phantom, camouflaged in the branches of a nearby tree, swiftly drew back their arm and launched a poison-tipped needle. The needle flew silently through the air, striking Ben's back shoulder with deadly precision. He let out a pained scream, his body jerking violently as the poison coursed through his veins. Ugh! Ben gritted his teeth. Ben's voice rang out, warning his comrades of the new threat. There's poison needles from above. Use your aura to block it or dodge it with your footwork. But before anyone could react, one of the group members shouted out a new warning. Sir Ben, they threw down a bag of poison gas. Ben's eyes snapped towards the source of the warning, and he saw the bag exploding on the ground. Ben's eyes widened in alarm as he realized the potency of the poison gas. This poison is stronger than what the monsters use, he thought to himself, his mind racing with the implications. Without hesitation, he shouted out a warning to his group. Everyone, cover your mouths, he yelled, his voice carrying across the battlefield as he instinctively raised his own arm to cover his nose and mouth. The poison gas had already taken its toll, spreading quickly through the group. Some members began to sit down, their bodies weakened by the toxic fumes. One of them spoke up, their voice laced with desperation. Forget aura. I can't even lift my sword. Ben's thoughts were a jumble of worry and desperation as he assessed the situation. In that single moment, not only the other members, but even I was exposed to it, he thought, his mind reeling with the implications. He glanced around, taking in the sight of his teammates struggling to stay conscious. Runan's complexion is getting worse too, but the green phantoms and the orcs look completely fine. He noted, his eyes narrowing in concern. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. At this rate, we'll get wiped out, he thought, his heart sinking in despair. Just as all hope seemed lost, a sudden explosion rocked the ground near Ben, sending him stumbling backward. Ben's eyes widened in surprise as he stumbled backward from the explosion. This energy, and destructive power, he exclaimed, his voice trailing off as he realized who was responsible for the sudden turn of events. Martha, he called out, a mix of surprise and relief washing over him. Martha and her group charged onto the battlefield, their presence a whirlwind of steel and fury. Martha's voice rang out, her words a stark contrast to the desperate situation Ben's team had found themselves in. In place of these idealistic fools, let's clean up all the Eden trash, she shouted, her sword flashing in the fading light. Don't let a single one go. One of Ben's group members shouted out, his voice filled with relief and excitement. Reinforcements. Lady Martha and reinforcements have arrived. The news spread like wildfire, and the morale of Ben's group skyrocketed. One of them exclaimed, if they were just a little later, we would have passed out from the poison. Another member nodded in agreement, their face set with determination. Let's get up and join the fight, they urged, their voice filled with a newfound sense of hope and energy. Ben's eyes scanned the battlefield, his mind racing with strategy and hope. I can't see Raon yet, he thought, a hint of concern lingering in his mind. But as he watched Martha and the reinforcements cut through the Eden forces, his confidence grew. But with Martha and the others, the tides have turned, he thought, a sense of relief washing over him. A newfound optimism took hold of him as he assessed the situation. If this continues, we'll be able to win, he thought, his determination and hope renewed. One of the men in Eden's green phantom turned to another, his voice laced with alarm and desperation. What kind of recruits are that strong, he exclaimed, his eyes wide with fear as he gazed out at Martha and the reinforcements. The other phantom nodded in agreement, his face pale. Let's run, he urged, his voice low and urgent. If we stay here, we'll end up dead. The voice was like a cold wind, sending shivers down the spines of the two fleeing phantoms. Are you deserting the battlefield? It echoed through the forest, the words dripping with disdain and accusation. Martha, Runan, and Ben's eyes snapped towards the figure emerging from the shadows, their faces set with alarm. Ben's voice was the first to break the silence, his words tumbling out in shock. That can't be, he exclaimed, his eyes wide with incredulity. The three warriors exchanged uneasy glances, their minds racing with the implications of what they were seeing. They sensed a presence that far surpassed the likes of the green phantoms, a power that seemed to radiate from the very air around the figure. The headgear of a champion. Martha whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own heartbeat. And the ability to speak human language. Ronan added, his eyes locked on the figure with a mix of fascination and fear. Ben's voice dropped to a whisper, his words trembling with a sense of awe. Eden. Green Battle Phantom. Ben's eyes narrowed, his mind racing with questions. You might be low-ranked, he said, his voice laced with skepticism, but what's an officer of Eden doing here? The Green Battle Phantom, Eden, regarded Ben with an unreadable expression. Then, in a voice that sent shivers down Ben's spine, Eden replied, I'm sure I received a report of your return, but did you come back after realizing our intent to ambush? Eden's gaze swept over Martha, a hint of amusement dancing in his eyes. You're quite good for recruits, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. From what I've seen of your strength, black-haired broad, it seems you've realized. Martha's eyes flashed with anger, her hand tightening around the hilt of her sword as she took a step forward, her blade at the ready. Eden's smile grew wider, his eyes glinting with malice. While you barely kept your life intact, you should have just gone quietly, he continued, his voice dripping with disdain. The reason you lot will die today is because you didn't know your place, and attacked Ben. The aftermath of the intense battle lay before them, a testament to the brutal clash of strength and wills. Martha and Ronan sat on the ground, their chests heaving with exhaustion, their faces etched with pain and fatigue. Ben, however, lay motionless on the ground, his body twisted in an unnatural position. His face was contorted in a grimace of agony, his eyes squeezed shut as he struggled to cope with the intense pain that racked his body. Eden stood tall, his chest barely rising with each breath, a picture of calm and composure. One of Kane's group members exclaimed, their voice laced with shock and awe, with just one hit, the three of them were. Another member of the group turned to them, concern etched on their face. Where's Sir Kane? They asked, scanning the surrounding area. A third member pointed towards the wooden barricade, their voice urgent. Sir Kane is by the wooden barricade, facing the orcs. The first member's eyes widened in alarm as they thought of another critical factor. Then what about Raon? One of Kane's group members exclaimed, there's no way he'd come after seeing that. Meanwhile, Eden's voice cut through the air, his words dripping with disdain as he addressed Martha. Ho! You are able to stand? It seems you're the best out of the garbage here. Martha's eyes flashed with anger at Eden's insult, but she refused to back down. With a Herculean effort, she gripped her sword tightly and tried to stand up, her body trembling with pain and exhaustion. Eden's gaze lingered on Martha, a hint of curiosity in his eyes. Of course, that's only a given since you were able to sense our presence, he added, his voice dripping with condescension. Martha stood up, her grip on her sword tightening as she prepared to face Eden's attack. Eden's eyes gleamed with a fierce intensity as he spoke, his voice dripping with malice. All of you will die here, today. With a swift motion, Eden raised his sword, ready to strike down Martha. But before he could attack, a scream roared through the area, shattering the tense silence. No! The cry was followed by a burst of fiery aura as Raon appeared behind Eden, his eyes blazing with fury. You'll die, Raon declared, his voice low and menacing. Eden slowly turned his head, his eyes narrowing as he took in Raon's fierce expression. Raon stood tall, his sword at the ready, and with a swift motion, he unleashed his Thousand Flames technique. The first flames, Cyclorsion, erupted in a blaze of fire and steel, slicing through the air with deadly precision. Eden's eyes widened in shock as Raon's sword cut down his right hand, severing it from his wrist. Eden's smile grew wider as he gazed at Raon with an unblinking stare. That was a good ambush. However, it seems you didn't think I would step in to avoid a blow to my neck. Raon's face twisted in frustration, his eyes blazing with anger. You crazy dash, he growled, his voice trembling with rage. Giving up your arm because of that, that's why I wanted to end this with an assassination. What would happen next? Comment below for the next chapter. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more epic battles and intense storylines. Thanks for watching.